A whole sack of potatoes cost $1 in the 1930s. Clara Cannucciari, born outside Chicago in 1915, had to quit high school because her family couldn't afford socks. But she kept one recipe that fed her whole house, and today it has over 1 million views. It's one of 15 forgotten meals that kept people alive. Number 15 is milk toast. Milk toast sounds like something you'd feed a cat. But in a lot of Depression homes, this was breakfast, and it was what Mama gave you when you were sick. You took a slice of stale white bread, dropped it in a bowl, poured hot milk over it, and shook sugar and cinnamon on top. In houses with no milk, they poured hot coffee over the bread instead, and called that breakfast too. It was cheap, it filled a stomach, and for a lot of American kids in 1932, this soggy piece of bread was the biggest thing they ate all day. But it gets darker when you hear what families were pulling out of their own yards to feed everybody. Number 14 is dandelion salad. Yes, the same yellow weed that takes over your lawn every summer. In the 30s, mothers were sending kids out to pick those leaves before breakfast because dandelions were free, everywhere, and loaded with iron, calcium, and vitamins A and C. You washed the greens, chopped them, and tossed them with a splash of vinegar and whatever bit of fat you had left. Some houses fried the yellow flowers as a side. When a farmer's paycheck was gone, the front lawn was still there. That's the quiet rule of every hungry decade. What the rich throw out, the poor learn to cook. And the next dish used nothing but water, cornmeal, and salt. Number 13 is cornmeal mush. The recipe reads like a joke on paper. You boil a pot of water, dump in cornmeal, and stir until the whole thing looks like wet sand. Salt it if you had any, and that was the whole breakfast. When the leftover mush cooled and set into a block, you sliced it, fried it in bacon grease, and dinner was ready. In southern Appalachia, this pot lived on the stove for 3 or 4 days straight because corn was cheap, and it grew where nothing else would. One bag of cornmeal could feed a family of 6 for a full week. The kids called it hasty pudding. The grown-ups called it again. And the pot never really got washed, because there was always another meal in it before it could cool. Number 12 is beans and cornbread. If cornmeal mush was breakfast, this was supper. And in a lot of Appalachian houses, this was supper for the 6th night running. You soaked pinto beans overnight, boiled them all day, spooned them over rice, and baked cornbread in a cast-iron skillet on the side. On a good week, somebody found a ham bone or a scrap of pork to drop into the pot. On a bad week, it was just beans and water and salt. And what breaks your great-grandmother's brain is next. That same cheap country dinner is on the menu at farm-to-table restaurants in Nashville and Atlanta for $20 a plate. Poverty food got repackaged as heritage cooking, and nobody in the marketing meeting mentioned that. Number 11 is poor man's gravy. Some Southerners called this sausageless gravy, and it was Southern engineering at its cleverest. You mixed flour, lard, salt, and milk, cooked the flour in the grease until it browned, whisked the milk in until it thickened, then shook in enough black pepper to speckle it. Poured over a hot biscuit. That gravy tasted almost exactly like sausage gravy. But there was no sausage. There was never any sausage. Kids grew up thinking those little dark specks were tiny pieces of meat, because that's what their mama told them. And she wasn't lying to be cruel. She was lying because she wanted her kids to feel like they'd eaten well. That's the one-line truth of the whole decade. Poor families didn't need fancy food. They needed to keep pretending. Number 10 is mock apple pie. This one might be the biggest scam in American baking history, and Ritz put it right on the side of the box. Ritz crackers debuted in 1934 for 19 cents a pound, and soon after, A recipe for mock apple pie showed up on the label. And now, the trick. There are no apples in mock apple pie. There are Ritz crackers, sugar, water, cream of tartar, lemon juice, cinnamon, and butter. You boil the sugar and water into a syrup, pour it over crackers in a pie crust, dot with butter, and bake. The crackers soften, the syrup sets, and it tastes so much like real apple pie that Nabisco kept the recipe on the box until 1993. 60 years of selling a fruit families couldn't afford. And one company took the idea further. Number 9 is Kraft Dinner. Because if Ritz was clever, Kraft was ruthless. In 1937, at the height of the Depression, Kraft launched a yellow box called Kraft Dinner. Inside was elbow macaroni and a packet of dehydrated cheese powder. The whole box cost 19 cents, and Kraft advertised it as a meal for 4 in 9 minutes. It sold roughly 8 million boxes in the first year. Think about what that number really means. In a country where a quarter of workers had no job, Kraft figured out how to sell 8 million boxes of dinner to people who couldn't afford dinner. That was a company reading the room. When World War II started rationing dairy, they sold even more, because one ration stamp bought 2 boxes. Kraft didn't just survive the Depression, it got rich off it. Number 8 is the poor man's meal. Clara Cannucciari was born outside Chicago in 1915. She lived through the Depression as a teenager, quit school at 14 because her family couldn't afford socks, and ate whatever her father brought home in a sack. At age 91, she started a YouTube cooking channel with her grandson called Great Depression Cooking with Clara. The very first meal she ever taught was this one. You dice up 6 potatoes, brown them in a skillet with a chopped onion, then throw in sliced hot dogs and a splash of tomato sauce. That's the whole recipe. Clara passed away in 2013, but that first video has now been watched more than 1 million times. Her one line about her whole childhood still hits like a punch. We were all fat from eating potatoes. Number 7 is wacky cake. Wacky cake looks impossible on paper. It's a chocolate cake with no eggs, no butter, and no milk. In the 1930s, all 3 of those were rationed, expensive, or straight up gone. So somebody, and history has no idea who, figured out that if you mix flour, cocoa, sugar, oil, water, baking soda, and a splash of vinegar, the vinegar hits the soda, makes bubbles, and the whole thing rises like a real cake. It's the only accidental vegan chocolate cake in American history. Best guess is a home cook with a better grip on chemistry than the men writing the cookbooks. She probably never got the credit. Most of these women didn't. But the cake she invented is still on birthday tables today. And the next dessert makes wacky cake look sensible. Number 6 is water pie. You heard that right, actual water pie. You take an empty pie crust, pour in water, sprinkle flour and sugar on top, dot the whole thing with butter, and bake it. When it comes out, some kind of oven chemistry has turned that plain water into a wobbly, sweet custard filling. And it tastes way better than it has any right to. Water pie recipes go back further than the 30s, but the Depression is what made this pie famous. Because when eggs and milk were gone, water was still free. Water pie went viral again on TikTok in 2020 during the pandemic and pulled millions of views. A Depression survival recipe made a comeback the second times got hard again. And the food nobody could escape in the 30s was even simpler than water. Number 5 is potato soup. This isn't fancy potato soup. There's no cream, no bacon, no chives. This is 1 potato, 1 onion if you had an onion, water, and a scrape of lard if you were lucky. That's the whole dinner. In the Depression, a whole sack of potatoes cost about $1. And families like Clara's ate them every single day for years. You had them fried, boiled, mashed, in soup, and in pancakes. Because when you have no money, you eat the same thing until you hate it, and you eat it again anyway. That's what poverty food really means. Not clever recipes, just the same starch on the same table, over and over, while the people on the other side of town ate ham steaks. Number 4 is creamed chipped beef on toast. Soldiers called it SOS, and most of them said that stood for something you can't really put on a family channel. The recipe first showed up in a 1910 Army cookbook, but it peaked during the Depression because dried salt beef was one of the cheapest proteins around. You melted butter, whisked in flour, poured in milk, and dropped in strips of paper-thin salt beef until the pan turned into thick white gravy. Then, you poured it over dry toast. Half a pound of chipped beef could feed 6 people. The military kept it on menus through both World Wars and Vietnam. Cracker Barrel and IHOP still sold it decades later. A meal born of pure desperation turned into a diner classic that refused to die. But not every survival food on this list was that harmless. Number 3 is poke salad. Poke salad might be the most dangerous meal on this list because it can actually kill you. Pokeweed grows all over the American South, and the young shoots have been eaten by Appalachian families for generations. But the mature leaves, the roots, the seeds, and the berries are all toxic. To eat it safely, you boil the leaves twice, throw out the water each time, then fry them in bacon grease. During the Depression, mothers in the Appalachian hollers sent kids down to the riverbank with a bucket for a mess of poke, and some months it was the only green thing on their table. Get the boiling wrong, and the symptoms included seizures, vomiting, and low blood pressure. That's how badly people needed to eat. And a lot of people ate with no house, no kitchen, and no stove at all. Number 2 is mulligan stew. Mulligan stew wasn't cooked in a kitchen. It was cooked in a hobo camp. Between the Civil War and the end of the Depression, migrant workers rode freight trains around America looking for whatever work they could find, gathering at camps called hobo jungles. At night, they'd build a fire and one big pot. One man brought potatoes, another brought onions, a third begged for meat, and somebody scrounged bread. Whatever ended up in the pot went in the stew, and everybody ate. There's a newspaper account from 1900 that describes the whole scene, right down to the coffee brewed in an oyster can. Mulligan stew was Depression cooking stripped down to its truest form. You shared what you had with the people around you, or none of you ate. That's the real Depression story, not the recipes, but the community around them. Number 1 is Hoover stew. And now, the meal that carries the whole story. In 1932, unemployment hit 25%. 82 bread lines were running in New York City alone. And Americans blamed one man, President Herbert Hoover. So ordinary people started naming things after him as an insult. Newspapers that homeless men slept under became Hoover blankets. Empty pockets pulled inside out were Hoover flags. Shantytowns were Hoovervilles. And the stew inside those Hoovervilles was Hoover stew. Boiled macaroni, sliced hot dogs, canned tomatoes, and canned corn, all in one pot. No spices, because spices cost money. It was named after him on purpose so nobody could forget. And the wildest part is happening right now. Food creators are cooking Hoover stew on TikTok this year, tagged as a grocery budget recipe. History is rhyming, and grocery aisles are the first place you can hear it. These meals weren't nostalgic, they were survival tools. Recipes born in a country that let its own people starve while its president threw parties. While the Red Cross said no. while gangsters ran the only soup kitchens that stayed open. If you want more stories, food channels won't touch. Hit subscribe. Depression recipes are trending online again in 2026. That's not a fun fact. That's a real warning.